The Voice from the Past by P.G. Wodehouse. At the ancient and historic public school which stands a mile or two up the river from the Angler's Rest, there had recently been a change of headmasters, and our little group in the bar parlour, naturally interested, was discussing the new appointment. A grizzled tankard of stout frankly viewed it with concern. "Benga!" he exclaimed. "Fancy making Benga a headmaster! He has a fine record." "Yes, but dash it, he was at school with me." "One lives these things down in time," we urged. The tankard said we had missed his point, which was that he could remember young scrubby Benga in an Eton collar with jam on it, getting properly cursed by the mathematics beak for bringing white mice into the form room. "He was a small, fat kid with a pink face," proceeded the tankard. "I met him again only last July, and he looked just the same. I can't see him as a headmaster. I thought they had to be 100 years old and 7 feet high, with eyes of flame and long white beards. To me, a headmaster has always been a sort of blend of Epstein's Genesis and something out of the Book of Revelations." Mr. Mulliner smiled tolerantly. "You left school at an early age, I imagine?" 16. I had to go into my uncle's business." "Exactly," said Mr. Mulliner, nodding sagely. "You completed your school career, in other words, before the age at which a boy, coming into personal relationship with the man up top, learns to regard him as a guide, philosopher and friend. The result is that you are suffering from the well-known headmaster fixation or phobia, precisely as my nephew Sacheverell did. A rather delicate youth, he was removed by his parents from Harborough College shortly after his 15th birthday and educated at home by a private tutor. And I have frequently heard him assert that the Reverend J.G. Smethurst, the ruling spirit of Harborough, was a man who chewed broken bottles and devoured his young. I strongly suspected my headmaster of conducting human sacrifices behind the Fives Courts at the time of the full moon," said the tankard. "Men like yourself and my nephew Sacheverell, who leave school early," said Mr. Mulliner, "never wholly lose these poetic boyish fancies. All their lives the phobia persists, and sometimes this has curious results, as in the case of my nephew Sacheverell." "It was to the terror inspired by his old headmaster," said Mr. Mulliner, "that I always attributed my nephew Sacheverell's extraordinary mildness and timidity. A nervous boy, the years seemed to bring him no store of self-confidence. By the time he arrived at man's estate, he belonged definitely to the class of humanity which never gets a seat on an underground train and is ill at ease in the presence of butlers, traffic policemen, and female assistants in post offices. He was the sort of young fellow at whom people laugh when the waiter speaks to them in French. And this was particularly unfortunate, as he had recently become secretly affianced to Muriel, only daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Sir Redvers Branksome, one of the old-school type of squire and as tough an egg as ever said yoicks to a foxhound. He had met her while she was on a visit to an aunt in London, and had endeared himself to her partly by his modest and diffident demeanour, and partly by doing tricks with a bit of string, an art at which he was highly proficient. Muriel was one of those hearty, breezy girls who abound in the hunting counties of England. Brought up all her life among confident young men who wore gaiters and smacked them with riding crops, she had always yearned subconsciously for something different, and Sacheverell's shy, mild, shrinking personality seemed to wake the maternal in her. He was so weak, so helpless, that her heart went out to him. Friendship speedily ripened into love, with the result that one afternoon my nephew found himself definitely engaged and faced with the prospect of breaking the news to the old folks at home. "And if you think you've got a picnic ahead of you," said Muriel, "forget it. Father's a gorilla. I remember when I was engaged to my cousin Bernard." "When you were what to your what?" gasped Sacheverell. "Oh yes," said the girl. "Didn't I tell you? I was engaged once to my cousin Bernard, but I broke it off because he tried to boss me. A little too much of the dominant male there was about old B, and I handed him his hat, though we're still good friends. But what I was saying was that Bernard used to gulp like a seal and stand on one leg when father came along, and he's in the Guards. That just shows you. However, we'll start the thing going. I'll get you down to the Towers for a weekend, and we'll see what happens." If Muriel had hoped that a mutual esteem would spring up between her father and her betrothed during this weekend visit, she was doomed to disappointment. The thing was a failure from the start. Sacheverell's host did him extremely well, giving him the star guest room, the blue suite, and bringing out the oldest port for his benefit, but it was plain that he thought little of the young man. The Colonel's subjects were sheep, in sickness and in health, manure, wheat, mangold wurzels, hunting, shooting and fishing, while Sacheverell was at his best on Proust, the Russian ballet, Japanese prints and the influence of James Joyce on the younger Bloomsbury novelists. There was no fusion between these men's souls. Colonel Branksome did not actually bite Sacheverell in the leg, but when you had said that, you had said everything. Muriel was deeply concerned. "I'll tell you what it is, Dogface," she said, as she was seeing her loved one to his train on the Monday. "We've got off on the wrong foot. The male parent may have loved you at sight, but if he did, he took another look and changed his mind." "I fear we were not exactly en rapport," sighed Sacheverell. "Apart from the fact that the mere look of him gave me a strange, sinking feeling, my conversation seemed to bore him." "You didn't talk about the right things?" "I couldn't. I know so little of mangold wurzels. Manure is a sealed book to me." "Just what I'm driving at," said Muriel, "and all that must be altered. Before you spring the tidings on father, there will have to be a lot of careful preliminary top-dressing of the soil, if you follow what I mean. By the time the bell goes for the second round and old dangerous Dan McGrew comes out of his corner at you, breathing fire, you must have acquired a good working knowledge of scientific agriculture. That'll tickle him pink." "But how?" "I'll tell you how. I was reading a magazine the other day and there was an advertisement in it of a correspondence school which teaches practically everything. You put a cross against the course you want to take and clip out the coupon and bung it in, and they do the rest. I suppose they send you pamphlets and things. So the moment you get back to London, look up this advertisement, it was in the Piccadilly magazine, and write to these people and tell them to shoot the works." Sacheverell pondered this advice during the railway journey, and the more he pondered it, the more clearly did he see how excellent it was. It offered the solution to all his troubles. There was no doubt whatever that the bad impression he had made on Colonel Branksome was due chiefly to his ignorance of the latter's pet subjects. If he were in a position to throw off a good thing from time to time on guano, or the influence of dip on the younger Leicestershire sheep, Muriel's father would unquestionably view him with a far kindlier eye. He lost no time in clipping out the coupon and forwarding it with a covering cheque to the address given in the advertisement. And 2 days later a bulky package arrived, and he settled down to an intensive course of study. By the time Sacheverell had mastered the first 6 lessons, a feeling of perplexity had begun to steal over him. He knew nothing, of course, of the methods of correspondence schools, and was prepared to put his trust blindly in his unseen tutor. But it did strike him as odd that a course on scientific agriculture should have absolutely no mention of scientific agriculture in it. Though admittedly a child in these matters, he had supposed that that was one of the first topics on which the thing would have touched. But such was not the case. The lessons contained a great deal of advice about deep breathing and regular exercise and cold baths and yogis and the training of the mind, but on the subject of scientific agriculture they were vague and elusive. They simply would not come to the point. They said nothing about sheep, nothing about manure, and from the way they avoided mangold wurzels, you might have thought they considered these wholesome vegetables almost improper. At first, Sacheverell accepted this meekly, as he accepted everything in life, but gradually as his reading progressed, a strange sensation of annoyance began to grip him. He found himself chafing a good deal, particularly in the mornings, and when the 7th lesson arrived and still there was this absurd coyness on the part of his instructors to come to grips with scientific agriculture, he decided to put up with it no longer. He was enraged. These people, he considered, were deliberately hornswoggling him. He resolved to go round and see them and put it to them straight that he was not the sort of man to be trifled with in this fashion. The headquarters of the Leave It to Us correspondence school were in a large building off Kingsway. Sacheverell, passing through the front door like an east wind, found himself confronted by a small boy with a cold and supercilious eye. "Yes?" said the boy, with deep suspicion. He seemed to be a lad who distrusted his fellow men and attributed the worst motives to their actions. Sacheverell pointed curtly to a door on which was the legend JNO B. Philbrick, manager. "I wish to see JNO B. Philbrick, manager," he said. The boy's lip curled contemptuously. He appeared to be on the point of treating the application with silent disdain. Then he vouchsafed a single scornful word. "Can't see Mr. Philbrick without an appointment," he said. A few weeks before, a rebuff like this would have sent Sacheverell stumbling blushfully out of the place, tripping over his feet. But now he merely brushed the child aside like a feather and strode to the inner office. A bald-headed man with a walrus moustache was seated at the desk. "JNO Philbrick?" said Sacheverell brusquely. "That is my name." "Then listen to me, Philbrick," said Sacheverell. "I paid 15 guineas in advance for a course on scientific agriculture. I have here the 7 lessons which you have sent me to date, and if you can find a single word in them that has anything even remotely to do with scientific agriculture, I will eat my hat. And yours too, Philbrick." The manager had produced a pair of spectacles, and through them was gazing at the mass of literature which Sacheverell had hurled before him. He raised his eyebrows and clicked his tongue. "Stop clicking," said Sacheverell. "I came here to be explained to, not clicked at." "Dear me," said the manager, "how very curious." Sacheverell banged the desk forcefully. "Philbrick," he shouted, "do not evade the issue. It is not curious. It is scandalous, monstrous, disgraceful, and I intend to take very strong steps. I shall give this outrage the widest and most pitiless publicity and spare no effort to make a complete exposé." The manager held up a deprecating hand. "Please," he begged. "I appreciate your indignation, Mr. Mulliner. Thank you. I appreciate your indignation, Mr. Mulliner. I sympathise with your concern. But I can assure you that there has been no desire to deceive. Merely an unfortunate blunder on the part of our clerical staff who shall be severely reprimanded. What has happened is that the wrong course has been sent to you." Sacheverell's righteous wrath cooled a little. "Oh?" he said, somewhat mollified. "I see. The wrong course, eh?" "The wrong course," said Mr. Philbrick. "And," he went on with a sly glance at his visitor, "I think you will agree with me that such immediate results are a striking testimony to the efficacy of our system." Sacheverell was puzzled. "Results?" he said. "How do you mean, results?" The manager smiled genially. "What you have been studying for the past few weeks, Mr. Mulliner," he said, "is our course on how to acquire complete self-confidence and an iron will." A strange elation filled Sacheverell Mulliner's bosom as he left the offices of the correspondence school. It is always a relief to have a mystery solved which has been vexing one for any considerable time, and what JNO Philbrick had told him made several puzzling things clear. For quite a little while he had been aware that a change had taken place in his relationship to the world about him. He recalled taxicabmen whom he had looked in the eye and made to wilt, intrusive pedestrians to whom he had refused to yield an inch of the pavement, where formerly he would have stepped meekly aside. These episodes had perplexed him at the time, but now everything was explained. But what principally pleased him was the thought that he was now relieved of the tedious necessity of making a study of scientific agriculture, a subject from which his artist soul had always revolted. Obviously, a man with a will as iron as his would be merely wasting time boning up a lot of dull facts simply with the view of pleasing Sir Redvers Branksome. Sir Redvers Branksome, felt Sacheverell, would jolly well take him as he was, and like it. He anticipated no trouble from that quarter. In his mind's eye, he could see himself lolling at the dinner table at the Towers and informing the Colonel over a glass of port that he proposed, at an early date, to marry his daughter. Possibly purely out of courtesy, he would make the graceful gesture of affecting to seek the old buster's approval of the match, but at the slightest sign of obduracy he would know what to do about it. Well pleased, Sacheverell was walking to the Carlton Hotel where he intended to lunch, when, just as he entered the Haymarket, he stopped abruptly and a dark frown came into his resolute face. A cab had passed him, and in that cab was sitting his fiancée, Muriel Branksome, and beside her, with a grin on his beastly face, was a young man in a Brigade of Guards tie. They had the air of a couple on their way to enjoy a spot of lunch somewhere. That Sacheverell should have deduced immediately that the young man was Muriel's cousin, Bernard, was due to the fact that, like all the Mulliners, he was keenly intuitive. That he should have stood, fists clenched and eyes blazing, staring after the cab, we may set down to the circumstance that the spectacle of these two, squashed together in carefree proximity on the seat of a taxi, had occasioned in him the utmost rancour and jealousy. Muriel, as she had told him, had once been engaged to her cousin, and the thought that they were still on terms of such sickening intimacy acted like acid on Sacheverell's soul. Hobnobbing in cabs, by Jove. Revelling tête-à-tête at luncheon tables, forsooth. Just the sort of goings-on that got the cities of the plain so disliked. He saw clearly that Muriel was a girl who would have to be handled firmly. There was nothing of the possessive Victorian male about him. He flattered himself that he was essentially modern and broad-minded in his outlook, but if Muriel supposed that he was going to stand by like a clam, while she went on Babylonian orgies all over the place with pop-eyed, smirking, toothbrush-moustached Gardees, she was due for a rude awakening. And Sacheverell Mulliner did not mean maybe. For an instant he toyed with the idea of hailing another cab and following them. Then he thought better of it. He was enraged, but still master of himself. When he ticked Muriel off, as he intended to do, he wished to tick her off alone. If she was in London, she was, no doubt, staying with her aunt in Ennismore Gardens. He would get a bit of food and go on there at his leisure. The butler at Ennismore Gardens informed Sacheverell when he arrived that Muriel was, as he supposed, visiting the house, though for the moment out to lunch. Sacheverell waited, and presently the door of the drawing-room opened and the girl came in. She seemed delighted to see him. "Hello, old Streptococcus," she said. "Here you are, eh? I rang you up this morning to ask you to give me a bite of lunch, but you were out, so I roped in Bernard instead, and we buzzed off to the Savoy in a taximeter." "I saw you," said Sacheverell coldly. "Did you? You poor chump, why didn't you yell?" "I had no desire to meet your cousin Bernard," said Sacheverell, still speaking in the same frigid voice. "And while we are on this distasteful subject, I must request you not to see him again." The girl stared. "You must do how much?" "I must request you not to see him again," repeated Sacheverell. "I do not wish you to continue your cousin Bernard's acquaintance. I do not like his looks, nor do I approve of my fiancée lunching alone with young men." Muriel seemed bewildered. "You want me to tie a can to poor old Bernard?" she gasped. "I insist upon it." "But you poor goop, we were children together." Sacheverell shrugged his shoulders. "If," he said, "you survived knowing Bernard as a child, why not be thankful and let it go at that? Why deliberately come up for more punishment by seeking him out now?" "Well, there it is," said Sacheverell crisply. "I have told you my wishes, and you will respect them." Muriel appeared to be experiencing a difficulty in finding words. She was bubbling like a saucepan on the point of coming to the boil. Nor could any unprejudiced critic have blamed her for her emotion. The last time she had seen Sacheverell, it must be remembered, he had been the sort of man who made a shrinking Violet look like a Chicago gangster, and here he was now, staring her in the eye and shooting off his head for all the world as if he were Mussolini, informing the Italian civil service of a 12% cut in their weekly salary. "And now," said Sacheverell, "there is another matter of which I wish to speak. I am anxious to see your father as soon as possible in order to announce our engagement to him. It is quite time that he learned what my plans are. I shall be glad, therefore, if you will make arrangements to put me up at the Towers this coming weekend." "Well," concluded Sacheverell, glancing at his watch, "I must be going. I have several matters to attend to, and your luncheon with your cousin was so prolonged that the hour is already late. Goodbye. We shall meet on Saturday." Sacheverell was feeling at the top of his form when he set out for Branksome Towers on the following Saturday. The 8th lesson of his course on how to develop an iron will had reached him by the morning post, and he studied it on the train. It was a pippin. It showed you exactly how Napoleon had got that way, and there was some technical stuff about narrowing the eyes and fixing them keenly on people, which alone was worth the money. He alighted at Market Branksome station in a glow of self-confidence. The only thing that troubled him was a fear lest Sir Redvers might madly attempt anything in the nature of opposition to his plans. He did not wish to be compelled to scorch the poor old man to a crisp at his own dinner table. He was meditating on this and resolving to remember to do his best to let the colonel down as lightly as possible, when a voice spoke his name. "Mr. Mulliner?" He turned. He supposed he was obliged to believe his eyes. And if he did believe his eyes, the man standing beside him was none other than Muriel's cousin Bernard. "They sent me down to meet you," continued Bernard. "I'm the old boy's nephew. Shall we totter to the car?" Sacheverell was beyond speech. The thought that, after what he had said, Muriel should have invited her cousin to the Towers had robbed him of utterance. He followed the other to the car in silence. In the drawing-room of the Towers they found Muriel, already dressed for dinner, brightly shaking up cocktails. "So you got here," said Muriel. At another time her manner might have struck Sacheverell as odd. There was an unwonted hardness in it. Her eye, though he was too preoccupied to notice it, had a dangerous gleam. "Yes," he replied shortly. "I got here." "The Bish arrived yet?" asked Bernard. "Not yet. Father had a telegram from him. He won't be along till latish. The Bishop of Bognor is coming to confirm a bevy of the local yokels," said Muriel, turning to Sacheverell. "Oh?" said Sacheverell. He was not interested in bishops. They left him cold. He was interested in nothing but her explanation of how her repellent cousin came to be here tonight in defiance of his own expressed wishes. "Well," said Bernard, "I suppose I'd better be going up and disguising myself as a waiter." "I too," said Sacheverell. He turned to Muriel. "I take it I am in the blue suite, as before?" "No," said Muriel. "You're in the garden room, you see." "I see perfectly," said Sacheverell curtly. He turned on his heel and stalked to the door. The indignation which Sacheverell had felt on seeing Bernard at the station was as nothing compared with that which seethed within him as he dressed for dinner. That Bernard should be at the Towers at all was monstrous. That he should have been given the star bedroom in preference to himself, Sacheverell Mulliner, was one of those things before which the brain reels. As you are doubtless aware, the distribution of bedrooms in country houses is as much a matter of rigid precedence as the distribution of dressing rooms at a theatre. The nibs get the best ones, the small fry squash in where they can. If Sacheverell had been a prima donna, told off to dress with the second character woman, he could not have been more mortified. It was not simply that the blue suite was the only one in the house with a bathroom of its own, it was the principle of the thing. The fact that he was pigging it in the garden room, while Bernard wallowed in luxury in the blue suite, was tantamount to a declaration on Muriel's part that she intended to get back at him for the attitude which he had taken over her luncheon party. It was a slight, a deliberate snub, and Sacheverell came down to dinner coldly resolved to nip all this nonsense in the bud without delay. Wrapped in his thoughts, he paid no attention to the conversation during the early part of dinner. He sipped a moody spoonful or two of soup and toyed with a morsel of salmon, but spiritually he was apart. It was only when the saddle of lamb had been distributed and the servitors had begun to come round with the vegetables that he was roused from his reverie by a sharp barking noise from the head of the table, not unlike the note of a man-eating tiger catching sight of a Hindu peasant. And glancing up he perceived that it proceeded from Sir Redvers Branksome. His host was staring in an unpleasant manner at a dish which had just been placed under his nose by the butler. It was in itself a commonplace enough occurrence, merely the old story of the head of the family kicking at the spinach. But for some reason it annoyed Sacheverell intensely. His strained nerves were jangled by the animal cries which had begun to fill the air, and he told himself that Sir Redvers, if he did not switch it off pretty quick, was going to be put through it in no uncertain fashion. Sir Redvers, meanwhile, unconscious of impending doom, was glaring at the dish. "What," he inquired in a hoarse, rasping voice, "is this dashed, sloppy, disgusting, slithery, gangrened mess?" The butler did not reply. He had been through all this before. He merely increased in volume the detached expression which good butlers wear on these occasions. He looked like a prominent banker refusing to speak without advice of counsel. It was Muriel who supplied the necessary information. "It's spinach, father." "Then take it away and give it to the cat. You know I hate spinach. But it's so good for you." "Who says it's good for me?" "All the doctors. It bucks you up if you haven't enough hemoglobins." "I have plenty of hemoglobins," said the colonel testily. "More than I know what to do with. It's full of iron." "Iron!" The colonel's eyebrows had drawn themselves together into a single, formidable zareba of hair. He snorted fiercely. "Iron! Do you take me for a sword swallower? Are you under the impression that I am an ostrich, that I should browse on iron? Perhaps you would like me to tuck away a few doorknobs and a couple of pairs of roller skates? Or a small portion of tin tacks? Iron, forsooth. Just, in short, the ordinary, conventional spinach row of the better-class English home. But Sacheverell was in no mood for it. This bickering and wrangling irritated him, and he decided that it must stop. He half rose from his chair. "Branksome," he said in a quiet, level voice, "you will eat your spinach." "Eh? What's that?" "You will eat your nice spinach immediately, Branksome," said Sacheverell, and at the same time he narrowed his eyes and fixed them keenly on his host. And suddenly the rich purple colour began to die out of the old man's cheeks. Gradually his eyebrows crept back into their normal position. For a brief while he met Sacheverell's eye. Then he dropped his own and a weak smile came into his face. Well, he said with a pathetic attempt at bluffness as he reached over and grabbed the spoon. "What have we here? Spinach, eh? Capital, capital. Full of iron, I believe, and highly recommended by the medical profession." And he dug in and scooped up a liberal portion. A short silence followed, broken only by the sloshing sound of the colonel eating spinach. Then Sacheverell spoke. "I wish to see you in your study immediately after dinner, Branksome," he said curtly. Muriel was playing the piano when Sacheverell came into the drawing-room some 40 minutes after the conclusion of dinner. She was interpreting a work by one of those Russian composers who seem to have been provided by nature, especially with a view to soothing the nervous systems of young girls who are not feeling quite themselves. It was a piece from which the best results are obtained by hauling off and delivering a series of overhand swings which make the instrument wobble like the engine room of a liner. And Muriel, who was a fine, sturdy girl, was putting a lot of beef into it. The change in Sacheverell had distressed Muriel Branksome beyond measure. Contemplating him, she felt as she had sometimes felt at a dance, when she had told her partner to bring her ice cream and he had come frisking up with a bowl of mock turtle soup. Cheated. That is what she felt she had been. She had given her heart to a mild, sweet-natured, lovable lamb. And the moment she had done so, he had suddenly flung off his sheep's clothing and said, "April Fool, I'm a wolf." Haughty by nature, Muriel Branksome was incapable of bearing anything in the shape of bossiness from the male. Her proud spirit revolted at it, and bossiness had become Sacheverell Mulliner's middle name. The result was that when Sacheverell entered the drawing-room, he found his loved one all set for the big explosion. He suspected nothing. He was pleased with himself and looked it. "I put your father in his place all right at dinner, what?" said Sacheverell buoyantly. "Put him right where he belonged, I think." Muriel gnashed her teeth in a quiet undertone. "He isn't so hot," said Sacheverell. "The way you used to talk about him, one would have thought he was the real ginger. Quite the reverse I found him. As nice a soft-spoken old bird as one could wish to meet. When I told him about our engagement, he just came and rubbed his head against my leg and rolled over with his paws in the air." Muriel swallowed softly. "Our what?" she said. "Our engagement." "Oh," said Muriel. "You told him we were engaged, did you?" "I certainly did." "Then you can jolly well go back," said Muriel, blazing into sudden fury, "and tell him you were talking through your hat." Sacheverell started. "That last remark once again, if you don't mind." "100 times, if you wish it," said Muriel. "Get this well into your fat head. Memorize it carefully. If necessary, write it on your cuff. I'm not going to marry you. I wouldn't marry you to win a substantial bet or to please an old school friend. I wouldn't marry you if you offered me all the money in the world, so there." Sacheverell blinked. He was taken aback. "This sounds like the bird," he said. "It is the bird." "You are really giving me the old raspberry?" "I am." "Don't you love your little Sacheverell?" "No, I don't. I think my little Sacheverell is a mess." There was a silence. Sacheverell regarded her with lowered brows. Then he uttered a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, very well," he said. Sacheverell Mulliner boiled with jealous rage. Of course he saw what had happened. The girl had fallen once more under the glamorous spell of her cousin Bernard, and proposed to throw a Mulliner's heart aside like a soiled glove. But if she thought he was going to accept the situation meekly and say no more about it, she would soon discover her error. Sacheverell loved this girl, not with the tepid preference which passes for love in these degenerate days, but with all the medieval fervour of a rich and passionate soul. And he intended to marry her. Yes, if the whole brigade of guards stood between, he was resolved to walk up the aisle with her arm in his and help her cut the cake at the subsequent breakfast. Bernard. He would soon settle Bernard. For all his inner ferment, Sacheverell retained undiminished the clearness of mind which characterises Mulliners in times of crisis. An hour's walk up and down the terrace had shown him what he must do. There was nothing to be gained by acting hastily. He must confront Bernard alone in the silent night, when they would be free from danger of interruption, and he could set the full force of his iron personality playing over the fellow like a hose. And so it came about that the hour of 11, striking from the clock above the stables, found Sacheverell Mulliner sitting grimly in the blue suite, waiting for his victim to arrive. His brain was like ice. He had matured his plan of campaign. He did not intend to hurt the man, merely to order him to leave the house instantly and never venture to see or speak to Muriel again. So mused Sacheverell Mulliner, unaware that no cousin Bernard would come within 10 yards of the blue suite that night. Bernard had already retired to rest in the pink room on the 3rd floor, which had been his roosting place from the beginning of his visit. The blue suite, being the abode of the most honoured guest, had of course been earmarked from the start for the Bishop of Bognor. Carburettor trouble and a series of detours had delayed the bishop in his journey to Branksome Towers. At first he had hoped to make it in time for dinner. Then he had anticipated an arrival at about 9:30. Finally, he was exceedingly relieved to reach his destination shortly after 11. A quick sandwich and a small lime juice and soda were all that the prelate asked of his host at that advanced hour. These consumed, he announced himself ready for bed, and Colonel Branksome conducted him to the door of the blue suite. "I hope you will find everything comfortable, my dear Bishop," he said. "I am convinced of it, my dear Branksome," said the Bishop. "And tomorrow I trust I shall feel less fatigued and in a position to meet the rest of your guests. There is only one beside my nephew Bernard, a young fellow named Mulliner." "Mulligan?" "Mulliner." "Ah, yes," said the Bishop, "Mulliner." And simultaneously inside the room, my nephew Sacheverell sprang from his chair and stood frozen like a statue. In narrating this story, I have touched lightly upon Sacheverell's career at Harborough College. I shall not be digressing now if I relate briefly what had always been to him the high spot in it. One sunny summer day, when a lad of 14 and a half, my nephew had sought to relieve the tedium of school routine by taking a golf ball and flinging it against the side of the building, his intention being to catch it as it rebounded. Unfortunately, when it came to the acid test, the ball did not rebound. Instead of going due north, it went nor'-nor'-east, with the result that it passed through the window of the headmaster's library at the precise moment when that high official was about to lean out for a breath of air. And the next moment, a voice proceeding apparently from heaven had spoken one word. The voice was like the deeper notes of a great organ, and the word was the single word Mulliner. And, just as the word Sacheverell now heard was the same word, So was the same voice. To appreciate my nephew's concern, you must understand that the episode which I have just related had remained green in his memory right through the years. His pet nightmare, and the one which had had so depressing an effect on his morale, had always been the one where he found himself standing, quivering and helpless, while a voice uttered the single word Mulliner. Little wonder, then, that he now remained for an instant paralyzed. His only coherent thought was a bitter reflection that somebody might have had the sense to tell him that the Bishop of Bognor was his old headmaster, the Reverend J.G. Smethurst. Naturally, in that case, he would have been out of the place in 2 strides. But they had simply said the Bishop of Bognor, and it had meant nothing to him. Now that it was too late, he seemed to recall having heard somebody somewhere say something about the Reverend J.G. Smethurst becoming a bishop. And even in this moment of collapse, he was able to feel a thrill of justifiable indignation at the shabbiness of the act. It wasn't fair for headmasters to change their names like this and take people unawares. The Reverend J.G. Smethurst might argue as much as he liked, but he couldn't get away from the fact that he had played a shady trick on the community. The man was practically going about under an alias. But this was no time for abstract meditations on the question of right and wrong. He must hide. Hide. Yet why, you are asking, should my nephew Sacheverell wish to hide? Had he not, in 8 easy lessons from the Leave It to Us School of Correspondence, acquired complete self-confidence and an iron will? He had, but in this awful moment all that he had learned had passed from him like a dream. The years had rolled back, and he was a 15-year-old jelly again, in the full grip of his headmaster phobia. To dive under the bed was with Sacheverell Mulliner the work of a moment. And there, as the door opened, he lay, holding his breath and trying to keep his ears from rustling in the draught. Smethurst, alias Bognor, was a leisurely undresser. He doffed his gaiters, and then for some little time stood, apparently in a reverie, humming one of the song hits from the Psalms. Eventually he resumed his disrobing, but even then the ordeal was not over. As far as Sacheverell could see, in the constrained position in which he was lying, the bishop was doing a few setting-up exercises. Then he went into the bathroom and cleaned his teeth. It was only at the end of half an hour that he finally climbed between the sheets and switched off the light. For a long while after he had done so, Sacheverell remained where he was, motionless. But presently a faint, rhythmical sound from the neighbourhood of the pillows assured him that the other was asleep, and he crawled cautiously from his lair. Then, stepping with infinite caution, he moved to the door, opened it, and passed through. The relief which Sacheverell felt as he closed the door behind him would have been less intense had he realized that, through a slight mistake in his bearings, he had not, as he supposed, reached the haven of the passage outside, but had merely entered the bathroom. This fact was not brought home to him until he had collided with an unexpected chair, upset it, tripped over a bath mat, clutched for support into the darkness, and brushed from off the glass shelf above the basin a series of bottles containing, in the order given, Scalpo, it fertilizes the follicles, Soothine, for applying to the face after shaving, and Dr. Wilberforce's Golden Gargle in the large or 7 and 6 size. These, crashing to the floor, would have revealed the truth to a far duller man than Sacheverell Mulliner. He acted swiftly. From the room beyond, there had come to his ears the unmistakable sound of a bishop sitting up in bed, and he did not delay. Hastily groping for the switch, he turned on the light. He found the bolt and shot it. Only then did he sit down on the edge of the bath and attempt to pass the situation under careful review. He was not allowed long for quiet thinking. Through the door came the sound of deep breathing. Then a voice spoke. "Who is there?" As always in the dear old days of school, it caused Sacheverell to leap 6 inches. He had just descended again when another voice spoke in the bedroom. It was that of Colonel Sir Redvers Branksome, who had heard the crashing of glass and had come, in the kindly spirit of a good host, to make inquiries. "What is the matter, my dear Bishop?" he asked. "It is a burglar, my dear Colonel," said the Bishop. "A burglar?" A burglar. He has locked himself in the bathroom. Then how extremely fortunate, said the colonel heartily, that I should have brought along this battle-axe and shotgun on the chance. Sacheverell felt that it was time to join in the conversation. He went to the door and put his lips against the keyhole. "It's all right," he said quaveringly. The colonel uttered a surprised exclamation. "He says it's all right," he reported. "Why does he say it is all right?" asked the bishop. "I didn't ask him," replied the colonel. "He just said it was all right." The bishop sniffed peevishly. "It is not all right," he said with a certain heat, "and I am at a loss to understand why the man should affect to assume that it is. I suggest, my dear colonel, that our best method of procedure is as follows. You take the shotgun and stand in readiness, and I will hew down the door with this admirable battle-axe." And it was at this undeniably critical point in the proceedings that something soft and clinging brushed against Sacheverell's right ear, causing him to leap again, this time a matter of 8 inches and a quarter. And spinning round, he discovered that what had touched his ear was the curtain of the bathroom window. There now came a splintering crash, and the door shook on its hinges. The bishop, with all the blood of 100 militant churchman ancestors afire within him, had started operations with the axe. But Sacheverell scarcely heard the noise. The sight of the open window had claimed his entire attention, and now, moving nimbly, he clambered through it, alighting on what seemed to be leads. For an instant he gazed wildly about him. Then, animated perhaps by some subconscious memory of the boy who bore mid snow and ice the banner with the strange device Excelsior, he leapt quickly upwards and started to climb the roof. Muriel Branksome, on retiring to her room on the floor above the blue suite, had not gone to bed. She was sitting at her open window thinking. Her thoughts were bitter ones. It was not that she felt remorseful. In giving Sacheverell the air at their recent interview, her conscience told her that she had acted rightly. He had behaved like a domineering sheik of the desert, and a dislike for domineering sheiks of the desert had always been an integral part of her spiritual makeup. But the consciousness of having justice on her side is not always enough to sustain a girl at such a time, and an aching pain gripped Muriel as she thought of the Sacheverell she had loved. The old, mild, sweet-natured Sacheverell, who had asked nothing better than to gaze at her with adoring eyes, removing them only when he found it necessary to give his attention to the bit of string with which he was doing tricks. She mourned for this vanished Sacheverell. Obviously, after what had happened, he would leave the house early in the morning, probably long before she came down, for she was a late riser. She wondered if she would ever see him again. At this moment she did. He was climbing up the slope of the roof towards her on his hands and knees, and for one who was not a cat, doing it extremely well. She had hardly risen to her feet before he was standing at the window, clutching the sill. Muriel choked. She stared at him with wide, tragic eyes. "What do you want?" she asked harshly. "Well, as a matter of fact," said Sacheverell, "I was wondering if you would mind if I hid under your bed for a bit." And suddenly, in the dim light, the girl saw that his face was contorted with a strange terror. And at the spectacle all her animosity seemed to be swept away as if on a tidal wave, and back came the old love and esteem, piping hot and as fresh as ever. An instant before she had been wanting to beat him over the head with a brick. Now she ached to comfort and protect him. For here once more was the Sacheverell she had worshipped. The poor, timid, fluttering, helpless pipsqueak whose hair she had always wanted to stroke, and to whom she had felt a strange, intermittent urge to offer lumps of sugar. "Come right in," she said. He threw her a hasty word of thanks and shot over the sill. Then abruptly he stiffened, and the wild, hunted look was in his eyes again. From somewhere below there had come the deep baying of a bishop on the scent. He clutched at Muriel, and she held him to her like a mother soothing a nightmare-ridden child. "Listen," he whispered. "Who are they?" asked Muriel. "Headmasters," panted Sacheverell. "Droves of headmasters and colonels, coveys of colonels, with battle-axes and shotguns. Save me, Muriel." "There," said Muriel. There." She directed him to the bed, and he disappeared beneath it like a diving duck. "You will be quite safe there," said Muriel. "And now tell me what it is all about." Outside they could hear the noise of the hue and cry. The original strength of the company appeared to have been augmented by the butler and a few sporting footmen. Brokenly, Sir Cheverel told her all. "But what were you doing in the blue suite?" asked the girl when he had concluded his tale. "I don't understand." "I went to interview your cousin Bernard to tell him that he should marry you only over my dead body." "What an unpleasant idea," said Muriel, shivering a little. "And I don't see how it could have been done, anyway." She paused a moment, listening to the uproar. Somewhere downstairs, footmen seemed to be falling over one another, and once there came the shrill cry of a hunting bishop stymied by a hat stand. "But what on earth," she asked, resuming her remarks, "made you think that I was going to marry Bernard? I thought that that was why you gave me the bird." "Of course it wasn't. I gave you the bird because you had suddenly turned into a beastly, barking, bullying, overbearing blighter." There was a pause before Sacheverell spoke. "Had I?" he said at length. "Yes, I suppose I had. Tell me," he continued, "is there a good milk train in the morning?" "At 3:40, I believe." "I'll catch it." "Must you really go?" "I must indeed." "Oh well," said Muriel, "it won't be long before we meet again. I'll run up to London one of these days and we'll have a bit of lunch together and get married and—" A gasp came from beneath the bed. "Married? Do you really mean that you will marry me, Muriel?" "Of course I will. The past is dead. You are my own precious angel pet again, and I love you madly, passionately. What's been the matter with you these last few weeks, I can't imagine, but I can see it's all over now, so don't let's talk any more about it." "Hark!" she said, holding up a finger as a sonorous booming noise filled the night, accompanied by a flood of rich oaths in what appeared to be some foreign language, possibly Hindustani. "I think father has tripped over the dinner gong." Sacheverell did not answer. His heart was too full for words. He was thinking how deeply he loved this girl and how happy those few remarks of hers had made him. And yet, mingled with his joy, there was something of sorrow. As the old Roman poet has it, surgit amari aliquid. He had just remembered that he had paid the Leave It to Us correspondence school 15 guineas in advance for a course of 20 lessons. He was abandoning the course after taking 8. And the thought that stabbed him like a knife was that he no longer had enough self-confidence and iron will left to enable him to go to JNO B. Philbrick, manager, and demand a refund.